Copying, plagiarism, stealing. These are some words you can read in many music discussions. The discourse is based on the defense of originality, something protected by copyright laws. But if I told you that borrowing is actually how music is made? Hi, my name is Ricky, and in this channel we discuss world music based in its social history. In this video, we will discuss how copyright laws doesn't really protect the artist and how the concept of originality is misunderstood. One of the hottest topics in music discussion is the accusations of plagiarism. But before we argue about that, we need to understand first how music is treated under the law and how this affects musicians. Well, it's logic to think that if a musician makes a song, then he is the owner of the song and he is the only one who can profit from it, right? That's what intellectual property and the copyright laws is about. It serves to protect the rights of the artists. Indeed, copyright laws is in the foundation of music industry. It began with the protection of sheet music books, which allow music publishing companies to emerge. Later, these companies evolved into record labels. Over time, copyright laws changed alongside with new technologies and market pressures, eventually leading to the system we have today. Basically, there is two distinct copyrights for a song. The musical work, which is the composition made by the songwriter and owned by them or the publisher, and the sound recording known as the master recording and usually owned by the record labels. For example, Michael Jackson's Thriller was composed by Rod Temperton, so Temperton, actually his family today, owns the rights of the composition, but the sound recording rights are owned by MJ's production company, the actual owners of the master. And here our discussion gets deeper because on the surface it looks simple. If I write a song, then all the rights and profits will come to me and anyone else involved because I made the song. But what actually did I create it? What new thing did I bring to the world that I can claim ownership? And most importantly, how can we, in an objective way, handle all the music made in the world without breaking anyone's copyright? The idea that a song can be owned, that creativity is something private, individual, and protectable, comes from a modern capitalist way of thinking about art that turns expression into property, ignoring the way creativity works. Because no artist creates from nothing. Every piece of art comes from reference, from what came before, from what is shared. That's how culture evolves. If you've watched Sinners, there's a scene that everyone talks about, where one of the meanings is how black music genres are strongly connected. In a simplified way, West Africa music becomes the blues and then rock and hip-hop, and you have jazz and gospel in the background. And what isn't discussed enough is that these innovations didn't happen in sudden leaps of inspiration. I mean, how did that inspiration work it in a material way? When we look close to the history of Western music, we see that copying has always been one of the main ways musicians used to create and innovate, even within the rules of their time. For most of the human history, musicians weren't expected to be original in the modern sense, because music's main role was to serve social institutions like the church. There was no sense of authorship, and when notation started to become popular, composers barely signed their names. As an example of borrowing, during the Reformation, Martin Luther adopted familiar and secular tunes into his worship as a way to convert ordinary people. So for most of music history, nobody really cared about what we would call theft. But that starts to change with the invention of the printing press and the consolidation of the modern European states in the 16th century. With the rise of the publishing market, music could now be mechanically reproduced and sold as sheet music, becoming a new economic asset in the early stages of capitalism. This made possible for composers to earn money in a new way, since before their income came from wages and patronage. As a result, court-favored composers began to seek exclusive rights over their works, especially against publishers and other composers. But once music became copyrightable, established publishing companies took advantage of this system, often crushing smaller and independent publishers by buying up the printing rights of both old and new compositions. And around mid-18th century, under the influence of Enlightenment philosophy, art started to be defined around the idea of the original genius, a shift embodied by Beethoven. From that point on, the value of a composition was measured by novelty and authorship, whether by how it creatively reworked tradition. If you like this kind of analysis and want to learn more about music, consider subscribing to my channel so you can support my work and make this knowledge to reach more people. The social frame I gave before would become more complex in the 20th century with the rise of the recording industry and the mass media communication that demanded regulations for music recording and reproduction. But borrowing never stopped, it just changed shape. Talking about Western classical music, one of the many myths about them, sometimes used to justify a false superiority over contemporary and popular music, is that they are 100% original. But classical musicians borrow from each other all the time. And I'm not talking about inspiration. When I say borrowing, I'm talking about copy and paste. It's something so common that in music theory we have all these terms to describe borrowing and reworking. And what people don't realize is that this is not so different from what happens today, because it's the same principle of using an existing song to make a new one. Talking about popular music, the controversy happens with interpolation and sampling. And let me debunk these terms. Basically, sampling is when you grab a piece of an existing recording, the sample, to reuse in any way you want in a new song. On the other hand, interpolation is the reuse of a composition. So instead of taking the actual sound, you re-record or recreate a part of the song yourself, including the melody or lyrics. And what about plagiarism? Well, plagiarism is a copyright infringement, which happens when you sample or interpolate without consent. Legally, for interpolation you need the publishing license, and for sampling you need both publishing and recording license. I talked about how borrowing and reworking is a common thing in music, especially done in an intentional way, but there are cases that it's not sure or it's not revealed where the source of inspiration came from, because that's how music evolves. The truth is that a song isn't just a fixed object that belongs to one person. It's something that passes through voices, cultures, and time. Every version adds a new layer of meaning, shaped by whoever performs it and by the moment it's performed in. One example is how Paul McCartney reused a bass composition to make Blackbird.
We didn't quite know it, but it was a thing by Bach, and it went like this. We didn't know that second half. And that was a bit we went wrong, but I always liked this little... So years later, I then adapted it into the song Blackbird. Taking that sort of thing,
And recently, Beyoncé recorded Blackbird for Cowboy Carter, which adds the song in a new context according to the album's message. A fundamental aspect of copywriting is that what is protected is the expression of an idea and not the idea itself. Facts and ideas are not copyrightable if they are inherent to a genre or they've become a standard, what is called sine faire. For example, common chord sequences and rhythms are not copyrightable. A song to be considered a copy needs to have a substantial similarity. The problem is that there is no objective limit between what is an expression and what is an idea. And because of that, it's up to the judge to decide whether or not there has been an infringement, which led to several controversial cases. For example, George Harrison was accused of copying a song from the Chiffons, and he lost because, according to the judge, he subconsciously borrowed the melody. Another case, more recent, was Pharrell Williams being sued by Marvin Gaye's attorney, and here the problem was the jury being instructed to consider the total concept and feel of the song. So instead of filtering out unprotected genre elements, they were told to consider what could have been considered as a sine faire. There's a legal principle called de minimis that, applied to copyright, creates an exception for copying a small and trivial amount, but in practice is not always applied. For example, NWA sample and reworked a tiny piece from a George Clinton song, but their de minimis claim was rejected. That was in 2005, but more recent, Madonna was sued and her de minimis claim was accepted. Because they are transformative use, sampling and coding could be considered a fair use, but the industry doesn't view that way. And you may think, why not simply ask for permission? Because if you use various tiny portions, what is common in rap albums, it becomes too expensive. Most musicians sign recording contracts that gives all the rights for the label, and these labels hate sampling because it decreases the profits, and in the end all the fees ended up going to intermediaries and the lawyers. There is also a lot of copyrighted music called orphan work because no one can find who holds the copyright. And I can't ignore the power imbalance in the industry because a lot of mainstream artists from the big labels don't ask permission for small and independent artists, especially musicians from the global south, but in the other way, big labels will not hesitate to sue smaller musicians. Even knowing all of that, the common discourse goes in the direction that borrowing and copy represents a lack of authenticity and artistry. I think the access of information we have today creates the impression that no one creates original music anymore, but the music of the past did the same thing in worse way. Therefore, the solution would be to abolish copyright and advocate for a free culture, but again, it's not that simple. Copyright laws exist because in capitalism we are forced to accumulate wealth. Copyright works in the contradictions of the capitalist system. It both gives some leverage to artists but at the same time enables exploitation. The real problem relies on who controls the production. Furthermore, in the beginning the internet was promised as a place of free culture, but what happened is that the big techs took advantage of it and today they control everything. Today we have the labels fighting against big techs and streaming services, but music artists, the ones who are truly exploited, are excluded from the conversation. Copyright was originally presented as a protection to the authors, but over time it became concentrated in corporations. Today, most copyrights are not owned by artists, but by record labels, publishers, and media companies. But still, art is a common good that should be protected by the society and accessible to everyone. So what do you think about this? Tell me in the comments what you agree or disagree. Thank you for watching and I see you in my next video.